Nikhil Prabhuji, are you able to share the verses on screen, please? Thank you.
Yeah.
Pranas Prabhuji, if you're ready, whenever you're ready, please start with invocation. Pranas Prabhuji, thank you.
All right. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Shaunaka Vacha. Nirgate Narade Sutta Bhagavan Badarayana. Shutavam Stat Abhi Pretam Tatakim Akarot Vibhum.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Rishi Shaunak asked, O Sutta, the great and transcendently powerful Vyasadeva heard everything from Sri Narad Muni. So after Narad's departure, what did Vyasadeva do?
Sutta Vacha. Brahmanadyam Sarasvatyam Ashrama Pashimetate Shamya Prasa iti Prokta Rishinam Satravardana.
Sri Sutta said, on the western banks of river Saraswati, which is intimately related with the Vedas, there is a cottage for meditation at Samya Prasa, which enlivens the transcendental activities of the sages.
Tasmin sva ashame vyaso badare shandamandite asino apa opaprisya prane dadhyau manasvayam.
In that place, Sri Vyasadeva, in his own ashram, which was surrounded by berry trees, sat down to meditate after touching water for purification.
Bhakti yogena manase samyak pranihite amale apashyat purusham purnam mayam chatat apashayam.
Thus, he fixed his mind, perfectly engaging it by linking it in the devotional service, Bhakti Yoga, without any tinge of materialism. And thus he saw the absolute personality of Godhead along with his external energy, which was under full control.
Yaya samohito chiva atmanam trigunatmakam parope manute anartham tatkritam chabhipadyate.
Due to this external energy, the living entity, although transcendental to the three modes of material nature, thinks of himself as a material product and thus undergoes the reaction of material miseries.
Anarthopa shamam sakshat bhakti yogam adhokshache lokasya janato vidvamsh shakre satvata samhitam.
The material miseries of the living entity, which are superfluous to him, can be directly mitigated by the linking process of devotional service. But the mass of people do not know this, and therefore the learned Vyasadeva compiled this Vedic literature, which is in relation to the supreme truth.
Yasyam vaishruyamanayam Krishne parama purushe bhaktir utpadyate pumsa shokamoha bhayapaha.
Simply by giving oral reception to this Vedic literature, the feeling for loving devotional service to Lord Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, sprouts up at once to extinguish the fire of lamentation, illusion, and fearfulness.
Sasamhitam bhagavatim kritvanukram yachatmacham shukam adhyapayam asa nivrite niratam muni.
The great sage Vyasadeva, after compiling the Srimad Bhagavatam and revisiting it, taught it to his son, Sri Sukadeva Goswami, who was already engaged in self-realization.
Shaunakavacham savainivrite nirata sarvatropekshakomuni kasyava brihatim etam atmarama samabhyasat.
Sri Shonika asked Suta Goswami, Sri Sukadeva Goswami was already in the path of self-realization, and thus he was pleased with his own self. So why did he take the trouble to undergo the study of such a vast literature?
Sutauvacha atmarama shamunayo nigrantha apiurukrame kurvantia haitukim bhaktim idham bhuta gunohari.
Suta Goswami said, all different varieties of Atmarams, those who take pleasure in the Atma or spirit self, especially those established on the path of self-realization, though freed from all kinds of material bondage, desire to render unalloyed devotional service unto the personality of Godhead. This means that the Lord possesses transcendental qualities and therefore can attract everyone, including liberated souls.
Harer gunakshiptamatir bhagavan badarayani adhyagan mahat akyanam nityam vishnu janapriya.
Srila Sukadeva Goswami, son of Srila Vyasadeva, was not only transcendently powerful, he was also very dear to the devotees of the Lord. Thus he underwent the study of this great narration, Srimad Bhagavatam.
Parikshito adharajarsher janmakarma vilapanam samstham chapandu putranam vakshe Krishna kathodayam.
Suta Goswami thus addressed the rishis headed by Shaunika. Now I shall begin the transcendental narration of Lord Sri Krishna and topics of the birth, activities, and deliverance of King Parikshit, the sage amongst kings, as well as topics of the renunciation of the worldly order by the sons of Pandu.
Yadamridhe kauravas rinchayanam vireshwadho viragatim gatishu vrikodara vidha gadam vihimarsha bhagnoro tritarashtra putre vartu priyam drauner iti isma pashyan Krishna sutanam svapatam shiramsi upaharat vipriyam eva tasya jugupsitam karma vigarhayanti.
When the respective warriors of both camps, namely the Kauravas and the Pandavas, were killed on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, and the dead warriors obtained their deserved destinations, and when the son of Dishracha fell down lamenting, his spine broken, being beaten by the club of Bhimasena, the son of Dronacharya, Ashwatthama, beheaded the 5 sleeping sons of Draupadi and delivered the heads as a prize to his master, foolishly thinking that he would be pleased. Duryodhana, however, disapproved of this heinous act, and he was not pleased in the least.
Mata shishunam nidhanam sutanam nishamya ghoram paritapyamana tadarudat vashpa kulakshi tam santvayan aha Satyamali.
Draupadi, the mother of the 5 children, it's gone too high, Prabhuji. The text has gone too high for me. Draupadi, the mother of the 5 children of the Pandavas, after hearing of the massacre of her sons, began to cry in distress with eyes full of tears. Trying to pacify her in her great loss, Arjun spoke to her thus.
Tada shishasте pramrichami bhadre yad brahma bandho shira atatayina gandeva muktair vishikhair upahare tvakramya yatsnasyasya dagdha putra.
O gentle lady, when I present you with the head of that Brahman, after beheading him with arrows from my Gandeva bow, I shall then wipe the tears from your eyes and pacify you. Then, after burning your sons' bodies, you can take your bath standing on his head.
Iti priyam valgo vichitrachalpai sasantvayi tvachyuta mitrasuta andva dravat damshita ugradhanva kapidvajo guru putram ranthina.
Arjun, who is guided by the infallible Lord as a friend and driver, thus satisfied the dear lady by such statements. Then he dressed in armor and armed himself with furious weapons, and getting into his chariot, he set out to follow Asvathama, the son of his martial teacher.
Tam apatantam savilakshya durat kumara hodvigna manarathina paradravat prana paripsur urvyam yavadgamam rudra bhayat yadha kaha.
Asvathama, the murderer of the princes, seeing from a great distance Arjun coming at him with great speed, fled in his chariot, panic-stricken, just to save his life, as Brahma fled in fear from Shiva.
Yada sharanam atmanam aikshata shanta vajanam astram brahma shiromene atmataranam dvijatmachana.
When the son of Brahma, when the son of the Brahman, Asvathama, saw that his horses were tired, he considered that there was no alternative for protection outside of his using the ultimate weapon, the Brahmastra, nuclear weapon. Hare Krishna, Hare Bol.
Hare Krishna. Thank you for opportunity to serve. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity.
Hare Krishna, thank you so much, Prabhuji and Mataji, for the lovely recitation. Really got us in the mood so that we can now get absorbed in this chapter. So we'll just recite the Mangalacharan and then we will start today's verse, which will be text 4. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Miritam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Pada Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute. Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna. Yes, I'll just share my presentation of this verse. Give me 1 second. Okay, so as I said, we'll be continuing our discussion on chapter 7, and today we'll be looking at text 4. So just recite the Sanskrit. Bhakti yogena manasi samyak pranihite male apashyat purusham purnam mayam cha tarapashrayam. Translation by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Thus he fixed his mind, perfectly engaging it by linking it in devotional service, bhakti yoga, without any tinge of materialism. And thus he saw the absolute personality of Godhead along with his external energy, which was under full control. And the purport. So just as I usually do, I just divided the purport into a few slides. So maybe would anyone like to volunteer just to read this first slide, please?
Can I do, Prabhuji?
Yes, sure, please.
Perfect vision of the absolute truth is possible only by the linking process of devotional service. This is also confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita. One can perfectly realize the absolute truth, personality of Godhead, only by the process of devotional service, and one can enter into the kingdom of God by such perfect knowledge. Imperfect realization of the absolute by the partial approach of the impersonal Brahman or localized Paramatma does not permit anyone to enter into the kingdom of God. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, thank you so much, Mataji. So, okay, so we can see here, Prabhupada is saying, if we want to see the Lord perfectly, to get the perfect understanding, then the only way we can do this is through devotional service. And it's been called a linking process. So we see in the translation, because it's referring to bhakti yoga. And as we know, yoga means to link or to connect. So bhakti yoga means basically to link with God, to link with the Lord through bhakti, through devotional service. And this is the best way that we can, it says, perfectly engage our mind. You know, our mind is so distracted, it goes to so many million different things, so many different subject matters. It's incredibly difficult to fix our mind. And we can engage it in certain things for a short time, but ultimately the mind always then wanders to somewhere else. But then we see here, we want to perfectly engage it so that it doesn't, wander, so that it feels just kind of just fully satisfied, if you like. And the mind doesn't feel like to still go here and there. Then we have to engage in devotional service. That's kind of like the natural position of the mind. Just like, Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita how the mind can be our best friend or our enemy, depending on how we engage our mind. You know, are we engaging in material things or Krishna consciousness? If we're engaging in devotional service, then it can become our best friend, because you know that's the natural position of the mind. Okay, so yeah, so he's saying that this is how we can get, through devotional service, this is how we can get perfect realization. And also, he says one can enter into the kingdom of God by such perfect knowledge. So if we actually want to go back to Godhead, if we actually want to go back to the spiritual world, then this is the way. Again, through the linking process of devotional service. And you know, it's saying this is perfect knowledge because, as we know, we've mentioned so many times, that we can understand so many material things, but only when we understand Krishna, then we understand everything. That is a perfect knowledge. Srila Prabhupada says so many times in classes, you don't need to know all these so many other things. Just know Krishna. Just try to understand Krishna, and that's it. That's all you need, you know. And then Krishna can, you know, Krishna within your heart, he can then give you the realization of, you know, the knowledge that you require. But the first thing is you know, to approach Krishna. So then it says that basically if we got the Brahman realization, it says the impersonal Brahman realization or localized Paramatma realization, Prabhupada has called this a partial approach. So when we have these, you know, Brahman realization, Paramatma realization, we are approaching the Lord, we are approaching the Absolute, but it's only partial. We haven't gone, you know, all the way. And here it says, if we only have that partial realization, again, we cannot enter into the kingdom of God. We cannot go back to Godhead. So it's actually completely necessary that if we want to go back to Krishna, we have to go even beyond. Obviously, these are still very elevated positions. Brahman realization, Paramatma, it's not like a minor thing, it's a very elevated position, but still we have to go even beyond that. But thankfully we don't have to. For us, if we're practicing devotees, it's not that we have to go through one to another. We can just go straight to Bhagwan, you know, because, you know, Srila Prabhupada has so kindly given us this process of devotional service so that we can go straight to Krishna. He's in his books, in his purports, everywhere he's given the knowledge of how, you know, bhakti is supreme, bhakti is superior to all these other parts, and is the simplest, quickest way to approach Krishna is to, you know, approach him in that way, in a personal way, basically. So in many ways, Srila Prabhupada has made it so easy for us in that sense, that he's always just, you know, given us the essence. He never makes us forget what is the essence. So then Prabhupada's continuing. Would anyone else like to read this slide, please?
Yes, Prabhuji.
Okay, thank you.
Shri Narada advised Srila Vyasadeva to become absorbed in transcendental meditation on the personality of Godhead and his activities. Srila Vyasadeva did not take notice of the effulgence of Brahman because this is not absolute vision. The absolute vision is the personality of Godhead, as it is confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita 7.19, Vasudeva Sarvam Iti. In the Upanishads also it is confirmed that Vasudeva, the personality of Godhead, is covered by the golden glowing Hiranyamayina Patrena, wheel of impersonal Brahman, and when that curtain is removed by the mercy of the Lord, the real face of the Absolute is seen. Hare Krishna.
Okay, thank you so much, Mataji. So, okay, so so what has Srila Vyasadev's spiritual master advised him. He advised him that he should become absorbed in transcendental meditation on the personality of Godhead and his activities. Transcendental meaning this is beyond anything material, completely spiritual meditation on Krishna and his activities, his pastimes, his qualities, etc. So following this advice, it says that he did not take notice of the effulgence of Brahman because that's not absolute vision. So he didn't really, he knew this is not the full picture, so I don't place any importance on this. I want to focus myself on the personality of Godhead himself. And then here Prabhupada quotes Bhagavad Gita as well, and he even mentions the Upanishads as well, where it's also confirmed that this impersonal Brahman, this Brahma Jyoti, so the golden glowing Hiranmayana Patrina, is like a veil or a curtain which is covering the real face of the Lord, which is covering Krishna. And you know, I mentioned before, if we're only gone partially towards the Lord and we only have this impersonal Brahman realization, I mean, specifically we're talking about Brahman in this case. So if we only have that Brahman realization, then that's as far as we can see, and that curtain will never be, you know, removed for us. So again, it's saying that if we want to remove that curtain, if we actually want to see Krishna face to face, then we have to go beyond that impersonal realization. Just again, like Srila Prabhupada said in so many classes, just like we are seeing each other face to face, if you go back to Krishna, you can see Krishna face to face, you can play with Krishna, you can eat with Krishna, you can dance with Krishna, sing with Krishna. You know, so many times he mentions this point. So again, this is how it all comes back to devotional service. This is the way to do it, to remove that veil, that curtain, so we can actually see Krishna face to face. You know, how amazing that would be when we finally pull that curtain back, and there, you know, Krishna is a beautiful Shama Sundar form of Krishna right in front of us. You know, how amazing would that be? So yeah, again, this is all because of Srila Prabhupada's kindness, that we have all this knowledge, that we know about all this. Okay, so the next one is a bit smaller. Do we have another volunteer to read this part?
Hare Krishna, Dr. Kiran.
Yeah, please, thank you.
The absolute is mentioned here as the Purusha or person. The absolute personality of Godhead is mentioned in so many Vedic literatures, and in the Bhagavad Gita, the Purusha is confirmed as the eternal and original person. The absolute personality of Godhead is the perfect person. Krishna.
Hare Krishna, thank you. Okay, so here Srila Prabhupada is mentioning how we always hear this word Purusha, and he's saying that this is referring to the absolute personality of Godhead, or in other words, Krishna, who is here, you know, it's basically three different things actually. Eternal, he's the eternal person, he's the original person, he's the perfect person. So again, kind of just emphasizing or re-emphasizing this point about Krishna being a person, Krishna having personality, so important. And you know, just like Srila Prabhupada always just hammers home this point again and again and again about, you know, differentiating between Mayavadis and devotees or personists, and you know, establishing the supremacy of personal understanding above the impersonal understanding, because this kind of impersonalistic philosophy is just everywhere, really. You know, often, you know, sometimes the question came up that, you know, this kind of thing, this impersonal philosophy or Mayavadis or whatever, that's mainly in India, isn't it? And then, you know, why is Prabhupada keep talking about it? You know, we don't really see that in the West, but actually we do, especially now, you know, more and more. so many, all kinds of different so-called, spiritual paths and spiritual groups are cropping up, and vast majority of these things are all impersonal in some way, in some shape or form. So actually, this impersonalism is everywhere. Even though initially you might think, oh, it's probably just kind of isolated to India, but no, it's actually very prevalent all over the world. So, that's why Srila Prabhupada put so much emphasis on this, on getting the full understanding that Krishna is a person. And this was following in the footsteps, obviously, of his spiritual master, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, because this was one of his main aims, or one of his main purposes, was to do exactly that, to establish the personal understanding of God, of Krishna. And because of this, I'm sure some of you may have heard about this pastime. When Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was still around on this planet, Srila Prabhupada wrote a poem, an English poem, as an offering to his spiritual master. And when his spiritual master received this poem, he was very, very pleased. And specifically, he was most pleased with one particular verse in this poem, where Srila Prabhupada had written, "Absolute is sentient, thou hast proved. Impersonal calamity, thou hast moved." So when Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he read this particular verse, he was very impressed. And he thought, this disciple of mine, he's fully understood my mission, he's understood my heart. And then afterwards, he said to his disciples, anything at that time, Abhay, anything that Abhay Prabhu, anything that he writes, you publish it in my magazine. He was very pleased with that. So Prabhupada is describing this impersonal understanding kind of spreading around the world. That would be a calamity, he says. But because of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's efforts, that kind of calamity has been prevented because of this establishment of the personal understanding of Krishna. So that's why Srila Prabhupada wrote that. Okay, so would anyone like to read this slide, please?
Yes, Prabhuji.
Yeah, okay, please go ahead.
Hare Krishna. The Supreme Person has manifold energies, out of which the internal, external, and marginal energies are specifically important. The energy mentioned here is the external energy, as will be clear from the statements of her activities. The internal energy is there along with the absolute person, as the moonlight is there with the moon. The external energy is compared to darkness because it keeps the living entities in the darkness of ignorance. The word apashrayam suggests that this energy of the Lord is under full control. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, thank you, Mataji. So now Srila Prabhupada is going on to describe the different energies briefly of the Lord. So mentions the internal, external, and marginal energies. He says that he has many, many different energies, manifold energies, but these three are the most important for us to understand. And I'm sure we've explained these different energies many times in the past, so I won't go into detail on these things now. But here it's mentioned that what we're specifically talking about in today's verse is the external energy. And here it mentions her activities, because we're referring to Maya, Mahamaya. But here it's saying that then it mentions the eternal energy. It's with the Lord just as moonlight is there with the moon. So meaning that it cannot be separated. They are always together. So Krishna and his internal energy, also known as Yogamaya, are always there together. You cannot separate the two. And then it's comparing the external energy to darkness, because basically when we are under the control of the external energy, then we remain in the darkness of ignorance. So yeah, so we are under the control of the external energy, but then Srila Prabhupada is explaining this word in the verse itself, Apashrayam. It means that the external energy is under Krishna's full control. So at the moment, as conditioned souls, I mean, I don't know if anyone, I don't know if everyone on this group is a conditioned soul. I can't say that, but at least for myself, I'm definitely a conditioned soul. So for such souls, we are under the control of the external energy, and then in turn, that energy is under the control of Krishna. So then, and we are always, so we are often described by this word here as our marginal energy, because we are on the margin, because, and then Srila Prabhupada explained so many times, because we're so minute, because we're minute living entities, we are susceptible to falling under the influence of the external energy. So because we are kind of there on the margin, then we are often, this phrase is often used, marginal energy, but ultimately we come from the internal energy. And I'll explain more on that later. I've got some more explanation from Prabhupada on that, I think in a few slides after this. Yeah, okay, so here, this last point will also be covered a bit later in the presentation. So we at least mentioned it now that this energy, you know, for us, it's such a powerful controller that we cannot seem to get out of its control, get out of its influence. But then here it's mentioning that this energy which we are having so much difficulties with, it is under the Lord's control. So giving a hint at how we can, or the only way we can actually come out of its influence. Okay, so yeah, would anyone else like to read this slide, please?
Prabhuji, may I please?
Yes, please. Thank you.
The internal potency or superior energy is also called Maya, but it is spiritual Maya or energy exhibited in the absolute realm. When one is under the shelter of this internal potency, the darkness of material ignorance is at once dissipated. And even those who are Atmarama or fixed in trance take shelter of this Maya or internal energy. Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Hare Krishna, thank you. So now it's talking about the internal potency or the superior energy. It says it's also called Maya. So, and we often hear Yoga Maya as well, because it is spiritual Maya. And here it says energy exhibited in the absolute realm. So basically, whatever is happening in the spiritual world, in the absolute realm, that comes under the influence of the Yoga Maya. And whatever is happening in this material world comes under the influence of Mahamaya. But this is for our understanding. For Krishna, there's no difference. It's just his energy. But for us, we understand it in these two different ways based on how the energy is being used. And also, this means also that the souls in the material world are under the influence of the external energy, and all the devotees, because every living entity in the spiritual world is a devotee. So all the devotees in the spiritual world are still under control in one sense, but under the control of Yoga Maya, which is completely different. They are under control for the purpose of enjoying pastimes. They're not in any kind of ignorance whatsoever. Okay, so it says, you know, that basically, again, this is saying how we can get out of this darkness of material ignorance is to take shelter of the internal potency. So what does that mean? In other words, basically taking shelter of Krishna, because we heard earlier there's no separation between Krishna and his eternal energy. So basically, how do we take shelter of the internal potency? Basically means taking shelter of Krishna. And how do we do that? We mentioned earlier the linking process of devotional service. And then it gives this, Srila Prabhupada gives this interesting point that even those who are Atmaram, they're already self-satisfied, they're already fixed, even they take shelter of the internal energy. Why? Because, you know, I mean, why would they want to if they're already self-realized, if they're already fixed? But we see the example of Shukadev Goswami himself. You know, we are reading the Bhagavatam. So Shukadev Goswami himself, as soon as he was born, or as soon as he appeared in this world, he was already Atmaram. He was already self-satisfied, self-realized. And as soon as he was already renounced as soon as he came out of the womb. But still, even for him, Shukadev Goswami, he heard a couple of verses describing Krishna, and then he was attracted, especially the second verse, which he heard describing Krishna's unparalleled mercy. You know, the verse which I think I've mentioned this in probably all of the classes again, but you know, the verse where the verse where it describes the mercy that Krishna showed to Putana, and it basically says that, you know, how can one take shelter of someone more merciful than he who gave the position of mother to the she-demon Putana. So especially when he heard this verse, he was very much attracted to Krishna, to the Lord. So then he came back. He had left home as soon as he came out of the womb, but he came back, and then he, you know, eventually heard the Srimad Bhagavatam from his father. So even for such souls who are already self-realized, they are still attracted, and they therefore take shelter of the internal energy. They take shelter of Krishna. We also know the example of the 4 Kumaras who are also self-realized. They were also self-satisfied, and then they also were attracted by the Lord, by Lord Narayan, when they went to Vaikuntha, and they smelled the fragrance of the tulsi leaves at the feet of the Lord, and then they became even more attracted when they came face to face with the Lord himself in Vaikuntha as well. So for such souls, still they are attracted by Krishna, but by the personal form. Yeah, so this last part of the purport. Do we have one last person to read?
Hare Krishna, can I read, Prabhuji?
Yes, please, Mataji.
Devotional service or bhakti yoga is a function of the internal energy. Thus, there is no place for the inferior energy or material energy. Just as there is no place for darkness in the effulgence of spiritual light. Such internal energy is even superior to the spiritual bliss attainable in the conception of impersonal Brahman. It is stated in the Bhagavad Gita that the impersonal Brahman effulgence is also an emanation from the absolute personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. The Parama Purusha cannot be anyone except Sri Krishna himself, as will be explained in the later slokas. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Mataji. Thank you for reading that. Okay, so now this very important point here, that devotional service or bhakti yoga is the function of the internal energy. Thus, when you can say when we are under the influence or under the control of the internal energy, by being devotees, then here it says there's no place for the external energy, for Mahamaya to come in. So again, just making this point clear that it's through devotional service that we get out of the control of the material energy. And it's here saying it's the function. So everyone, we can see, everyone in the spiritual world, or in other words, everyone under the internal energy, what are they doing? 24/7, they are doing devotional service, nothing else. Yeah, that's what the spiritual world is all about. And then, here we have this nice analogy that there's no place for darkness in the effulgence of spiritual light. And Prabhupada is saying that when we're in this internal energy, the bliss that we will experience is superior even to the spiritual bliss of Brahman realization. Many countless times more superior, like Srila Rupa Goswami in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, he says this in one verse. What is it? I can't remember the exact, but kind of paraphrasing that the bliss that we experience from impersonal Brahman realization is like a infinitesimal drop of water in the ocean of bhakti's happiness. So in comparison to the massive ocean of bliss that is bhakti, impersonal Brahman realization, that bliss is just like a tiny drop. So, but then here it's mentioned in Bhagavad Gita, it's saying that this impersonal Brahman effulgence is also coming from Krishna. So just as we heard before this, that the internal energy it cannot be separated from Krishna, it's always with Krishna, it comes from Krishna, but also this Brahman effulgence is also coming from Krishna as well. I'm sure we know that anyway. But just kind of reinforcing that point that everything basically is emanating from Krishna. Everything material and spiritual is emanating from Krishna, just as he says in the Bhagavad Gita, how all the material and spiritual universes come from him. And then here, like we heard earlier, Krishna was described as the Purusha. Again, Prabhupada is saying this time Param Purusha. And he's saying that the shlokas after this one will go into detail exactly how it cannot be anyone except Krishna himself. So, as it's in the later shlokas, we'll leave that one. But I just also had some extra bit from Bhagavad Gita, because this, I'm sure we're all familiar with this verse, Bhagavad Gita 7:14. It's so relevant to today's verse. I just wanted to end by looking at this verse. Devi Hesha Gunamayi Mama Maya Duratyaya Mameva Ye Prapadyante Maya Metam Tarantite. This divine energy of mine, consisting of the three modes of material nature, is difficult to overcome. But those who have surrendered unto me can easily cross beyond it. So this is the point that we were kind of discussing already before. This is the way to get out of the material nature, to cross beyond it, here it says, by surrendering to Krishna, because it is under Krishna's control. And then just got a few points from the purport. So first of all, Srila Prabhupada says, I haven't got the whole purport, but I've just taken a few things. So Srila Prabhupada says that the living entities belong to the eternal superior nature of the Lord. So remember earlier we mentioned the three energies, internal, external, and marginal. So we understand that we are described as being under the marginal, being on the margin, because we can fall under either the internal or external, but here it's making it clear that ultimately we belong to that internal energy. but because of our contamination by the external energy, then we have come under illusion. And then therefore we have this phrase, Nitya Baddha, eternally conditioned, which means eternal in the sense, Prabhupada saying that we cannot trace out the history when we actually became conditioned. So in that sense, it's eternal. Not completely literally eternal, but at least from our point of view, it's eternal, because we have no recollection of when we were not under the influence, or in other words, when we were in the spiritual world, we have no recollection of that. So from our point of view, it does seem like we're eternally conditioned. But at the same time, even if we're here, we are called Nitya Baddha, eternally conditioned. But if we go back to the spiritual world, then even those who have, we hear that those who are in the spiritual world eternally and they never fall down, they're called Nitya Siddha, eternally liberated. But it actually, Prabhupada explains that even if we're conditioned souls in the material world, once we go back to the spiritual world, we will also be called Nitya Siddha. So I just wanted to mention that. So, as explained in this verse, that it's very difficult for us to get release from the material energy, because even though we hear it's described as inferior, but still, because it is conducted by Krishna's will, we cannot overcome it. So for us, it may not seem so inferior; it might seem very, very superior to us in one sense, because it's just kind of, we feel like it's just Maya is just taken control in just all aspects of our life, in such a pervasive way. So we feel like, how can I ever get out of this? How can I ever be freed from this? But here we will get the answer from Srila Prabhupada. So first he says that only Lord Krishna or his bona fide representative, the spiritual master, can release the conditioned soul. So I just wanted to highlight that as well, because it's also the spiritual master, because they are Krishna's representatives, so they can also release us. So we need that superior help. So I didn't take that whole paragraph, but I'm sure we heard, if we read that purport, how Srila Prabhupada basically says that one who is bound cannot free themselves. Only one who is not bound can free that bound. So only Krishna or his representatives, they are not bound by material nature. So therefore, they can free us from it. And he's saying that devotional service is the way that we can, or it can help us gain such release. So it specifically says help us. It doesn't say devotional service gives us that release. It specifically says it helps us. So why is that? Because ultimately we need Krishna's involvement in this. So from our side, we perform devotional service, and that will help us gain that release, because it will attract Krishna's mercy. And then here it's saying that Krishna, being the Lord of the illusory energy, can order this insurmountable energy to release the conditioned soul. He orders this release out of his causeless mercy on the surrendered soul, and out of his paternal affection for the living entity, who is originally a beloved son of the Lord. So yeah, here is, so on our side, we perform devotional service, but then ultimately, Krishna is the one who can actually release us, because he orders Mahamaya that please release this soul, and it's giving two reasons for this. So one is his causeless mercy. He doesn't have to do it, but out of his own desire, he wishes to shower that mercy upon us, whether we may feel like we've done anything to deserve it or not, but still it's causeless. And then the second reason is out of his paternal affection for us, because we are all ultimately sons, we're ultimately children of the Lord. So obviously he has some affection for us, and obviously he doesn't want us to remain in this position of suffering. He wants us to come back to him, so that's given as his paternal affection for us. And then the final slide, this is the end of Prabhupada's purport to Bhagavad Gita 7.14. So basically where Prabhupada is saying that only Vishnu is the master of Maya. Therefore, he alone can give release to the conditioned soul. The Vedas, Shvetashvara Upanishad 3.8, confirm this in the phrase Tam eva viditva, or freedom is possible only by understanding Krishna. And then he says that even Lord Shiva affirms that liberation can be achieved only by the mercy of Vishnu. Lord Shiva says, Mukti pradata sarvesham Vishnu eva na samshayaha. There is no doubt that Vishnu is the deliverer of liberation for everyone. So yeah, I just wanted to end with that, because as we can see, this verse from Bhagavad Gita is very much relevant to today's verse. So I'll just go back to today's verse at the end, just to remind us what we've been discussing. So we've been discussing how this is how can we fix our mind on Krishna? We have to perfectly engage it by linking it in devotional service without any tinge of materialism. So we basically without any ulterior motives, any material motives, no other motives except to please Krishna. And by engaging in such devotional service, that's how we can fix our mind on the absolute personality of Godhead. And here, as we mentioned, we discussed in some detail how the external energy is under the full control of God, of Krishna. So yeah, that was my presentation. So before we finish with that, would anyone like to add any comments or corrections or any questions or anything you'd like to add? Please go ahead.
Prabhuji, just a realization.
Okay.
It's very good session, Prabhuji. It has clarified so many things in my mind, and really appreciate your effort in putting this all together for us. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Prabhuji,
Yes.
I have a request. Could you please tell us about Dashera? Today is Dashera.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I hadn't really prepared so much for that, but obviously we're thinking maybe someone will ask about that. So I mean, I don't think I can really tell you anything that you probably don't know already. I'm sure most of you know more than I do, actually. But I'll just say what comes to mind, I guess. Or actually, I'll say what I've been thinking about. That would probably be easier. What I've been kind of thinking about today, or what I've been trying to meditate on. So I was thinking, obviously today we are all celebrating the Lord's victory over Ravana, and it's a very glorious thing. But I was thinking also it's amazing in one sense, but in one sense it's not amazing at all. This is a point that Prabhupada makes many times as well, that for God, for Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, to defeat one demon like Ravan is no difficulty at all. It's nothing special in that sense. Actually, like Prabhupada makes the point that through his energy, through the Lord's energy, like we've been talking about the Lord's energy in today's class. So through the agency of his energy, Krishna, he can, or Lord Ram, the Lord, he can vanquish millions and millions of demons just by desiring it. He doesn't actually have to do anything. He doesn't even have to personally appear. So in that sense, it's not such a big achievement for obviously we are celebrating it and we should be, but from the Lord's point of view, it's not like a big thing. But then he still appears. He doesn't have to do anything, but still he personally appears. So why does he do that? As we all know, from his point of view, it's for him to enjoy his pastimes. And then also for us, it's also meant to, he displays his pastimes to attract the conditioned souls, to attract the hearts of the conditioned souls back to him. But yeah, otherwise for him, he doesn't really need to actually personally appear to do this. And then I was kind of thinking how to relate this day in my life, at least personally. Then I was thinking, I was reflecting, Ravan, he has 10 heads, and then I was thinking, this is not a reflection from any scriptures, but just something I was thinking, that 10 heads means 10 mouths. And then I was just thinking on a kind of different point, that these material desires that we have, it's like they have 10 mouths, like in one sense, like you're trying to feed, if we're trying to in one sense feed these material desires, if we're trying to fulfill our material desires, it's like they can never be satisfied. It's like you're trying to feed 10 different heads. It's like as much as you try to feed these desires, you cannot satisfy the appetite of these material desires. It's just kind of insatiable. So, but at the same time, so this is, on one hand, we have this kind of master. Basically, we are like we are serving, we are almost like a slave to, we are basically a slave to the material desires when we are conditioned. So anyway, we are slave to our material desires. And Srila Prabhupada says so many times in his classes that he mentions this point, that someone who's eventually just has enough, and he's just approaching Krishna, and he's saying that, for so long I've simply tried to serve my senses, but they never give me any break. They never let me stop working for them. They never give me pension, he says as well. He says, they're just constantly making me serve them, and now I've just had enough. I'm disgusted with my service or my senses, and now I wish to serve you, Krishna. I wish to surrender unto you. So we have on one side this master who is never satisfied, and we're just constantly trying to serve, but it's never enough. On the other hand, we have the most kind master, the most perfect master, Krishna. And if we try to serve Krishna instead of our material desires, then that is what we will become conditioned to. Then it will come naturally to us to serve Krishna rather than serve our senses. Just like you may have heard, there's this analogy that within us there's a good dog and a bad dog, and whichever dog you feed, that is the one which will be victorious over the other dog. So this is that point, that whether we're serving Krishna or serving our senses. And then I was just thinking on that point, again, it's more Krishna's pastimes than Lord Ram's pastimes. But anyway, this came to mind that on the other hand, Krishna is so easily, or Lord Ram, or the personality of Godhead is so easily satisfied with our service. And I was thinking of the example of, when the Vrajavasis, they're offering so many countless preparations to Govardhan Hill, and Krishna has taken on this gigantic form of to eat all the preparations that the devotees are offering, but he's just constantly wanting more. And we have that that past Anior, where he's just constantly asking for more. But then what happens? Eventually, just a single tulsi leaf is offered to the Krishna, and he's satisfied. That's it. He's fine now. Just a single tulsi leaf, which is obviously offered with devotion. And that in turn obviously reminded me of the verse from Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna says, just by offering a fruit, flower, or leaf, or some water with devotion, then he accepts it. So who could be I was thinking earlier today, who could be a more kind master than the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna or Lord Ram? That on the one hand we have the senses, which whatever we offer to them is not enough, but Krishna we offer just a tulsi leaf, and that's it. He's happy if it's offered with devotion. So basically what I'm trying to say is what at least what I was meditating on today. It's less stop trying to feed our material senses and try to feed Krishna, or in other words offer our service to Krishna with devotion. And that doesn't necessarily mean offering food, but what is Krishna actually eating, or what is actually Krishna actually taking in? He's taking in the devotion. In one sense, you can say he's eating the devotion. He's not eating the actual offering. So basically, whatever we're offering to Krishna, if it's with devotion, then he will accept it. And if we keep doing that, then it becomes natural to us, just like it once was. Ultimately, it was natural to us to serve Krishna, and we've just forgotten. So ultimately, this process, this linking process of devotional service, as we heard in today's verse, is to remind us to reawaken that natural propensity to serve Krishna. So anyway, that's what I was thinking today. So it's not so much in one sense related to the pastimes of Dashera, but that's what I wanted to mention. And as I said, I'm sure you're already familiar with the story itself. So yeah, would anyone else like to say anything before we close?
A very beautiful explanation. Thank you so much.
Krishna Prabhuji, Pranams. I'd read a nice prayer today from by His Holiness Jayapataka Swami for Darsara. I'd read that. It's a 2-minute prayer, but it's a nice, quite deep. It's a simple one, but it's a very evocative one.
Thank you.
So Darsara celebrates Lord Ramachandra's victory over Ravana during the battle in Lanka. Lord Ram managed to sever Ravana's head with an arrow. But when the head fell on the ground, screen's locked. But when the head fell on the ground, a duplicate miraculously appeared in its place. Lord Ram then severed that head, but once again another immediately manifested as a replacement. When Lord Ram released the Brahmastra, it sped through the air like death itself, and then violently fell on the chest of the wicked Ravana. The Ravana was only destroyed when his heart was pierced. Similarly, we have many bad qualities that hinder us from developing love of Godhead. These bad qualities can only be completely destroyed when the Lord himself removes them from our hearts. On this day, we can pray to Lord Ram to destroy those bad qualities in our hearts so that we can quickly return to his kingdom where there is everlasting happiness. By His Holiness Jayapataka Swami.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing that, Prabhu. That's
There is also, it happens also to be the appearance day of Srila Madhvacharya as well today. So it's a very auspicious day.
yeah, definitely. Thank you, Prabhu. Okay, so I think we'll stop there. So yeah, thank you so much to everyone who came today for the class, everyone who did the recitations and read the slides and everything else that we did. Thank you to all the organizers, and yeah, obviously we'll be continuing with this chapter tomorrow. So Hare Krishna, everyone. Vancha kalpa tarubhyasya
Kripa sindhubhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Hare